Here we go on the unified field. Steve Vernon interview, folks, right here. Mr. Steve Vernon is our guest tonight on the Unified Field, Atlantic Canada's only paranormal radio broadcast, and he is stated as being Nova Scotia's hardest-working horror author. He is the author of a brand new children's book, Maritime Monsters, a field guide, a primer for future parapsychologists, cryptozoologists, and monster hunters alike. He's also the author of several books, some of them being Halifax Haunts, exploring the city's spookiest spaces, Haunted Harbors, Ghost Stories from Old Nova Scotia, which will be interesting to talk about later, Wicked Woods, Ghost Stories from Old New Brunswick, which will send chills up my girlfriend's spine because she's terrified of ghosts, and she comes from New Brunswick. He's also written Texas Terrors, Gypsy Blood, Hard Roads, and many more, as well as contributions to at least 8 books and several magazines, including Cemetery Dance and Dark Discoveries. He resides right here with us in beautiful Nova Scotia and picturesque coastal Atlantic Canada, and he's joining us from his home here. Mr. Vernon, welcome to the program.
Oh, pleased to be here. Pleased to be here.
Now, I understand you were just at the Psychic Fair last weekend. I was there this weekend, but I missed your talk at 7 p.m. How was that for you?
It was splendid. It was a little quiet there. We had a small, pleasant crowd of about 20 people or so. That's good for a talk that's put on locally. It's sometimes a little hard to draw a crowd, but everybody was attentive, and we sold a few books and had a marvelous time. Told a few stories and talked about ghosts.
All right. Well, that sounds like a blast. I'm sorry I missed it, Steve.
Oh, no problem.
Now, I understand that you're originally from Northern Ontario, which is absolutely beautiful. I spent some time up there as a youngster. I'm actually going back to Kenora in Northern Ontario at the end of the summer here.
Kenora, no, yeah.
Yeah, can you give us a little bit of a background on why you ended up here? I read your bio, but for the listeners out there in Radioland, they might want to know a little bit more about Mr. Steve Vernon here.
Okay, well, I grew up in Northern Ontario, a little town called Camelot, about 20 miles north of Sudbury. It's a railroad town, it's a mining town, and that's about all that goes on. It's a very quiet little town. Sort of in a valley with little hills all around. When I was a kid, we called them mountains, but they're basically hills.
Yeah.
And I was raised by my grandparents. My mom and dad had split up early. They were about 18 or 19 years old. They had 3 kids, and they decided that maybe they were rushing things, so Dad went west and Mom went east, and my brother and I we remained there in Camelot with my grandparents. And at age 17, I decided that I wanted to get to know my mother, for starters, whom I had seen maybe once that I could remember, and so I came to Nova Scotia. I had finished up my high school, and I came to Nova Scotia to visit, and I landed in Halifax and got off at the airport, and I had missed the bus because I forgot about the whole time change, and I decided, well, I've seen Nova Scotia on the map. I'll just walk down to Yarmouth. It's just a stone throw away, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And I got as far as the highway sign and realized that Nova Scotia was a little bigger than I had imagined. And I lived in Yarmouth for about a month, and then sending a telephone call back home and said, send my stuff out here. I'm staying.
All right.
I stayed in Yarmouth for a year or maybe 2, and then moved to Halifax, and I've been here about 35 years.
Well, it's a beautiful province, that's for sure.
I got hooked on the ocean more than anything else.
That's just it. You go away for a bit, and you come back, and you breathe that wonderful Atlantic Ocean air, and you just feel like you're home. It's good to be here. I'm glad you're here with us today, Steve.
Pleased to be here.
I didn't mention this in the intro, but it's incredibly interesting, and it's part of the reason why you were at the Psychic Fair last weekend. Your bio mentions that you're a professional tarot and palm reader down there at Little Mysteries now. Is it still full-time, Steve?
No. Actually, it was last summer. I had to give all that up. I had been doing it for about 12 to 15 years.
Wow.
I was at Little Mysteries 12 or 13 years. But it has gotten so quiet down there on Barrington Street that the walk-through traffic that provides provides an income to somebody who's doing that sort of a thing just on a walk-in basis, it wasn't there. And, like everybody else, I have bills, so I have sort of retired from that. I still do the occasional party. I have folks who have my name or number, and they call me up and they say, will you come and do palms at this party, and if it's a group and I know then it's going to be a fun time, I'll go and I'll do it. But I can't say never, so I won't say I'll never go back to that work. But I have been away from it for about a year now.
Wow. It's an incredible story. I want to get into the books that you're writing, but I have to ask you because I know our listeners will want to know. How did Mr. Steve Vernon get involved with tarot and palm reading? What's the story? What's the background on this?
Well, like any storyteller, I have about 3 different versions of that, but the one that is closest to reality, I guess, is when I was a kid, there was this carnival come to town, and my grandparents took me and my brother, and we went on all the little rides. It was like Bill Lynch, only in Northern Ontario, which I forget what they called it. We just called it the Midway.
Right.
And there was this tent with a big old sign, fortune telling. And I said, I want to go in there. And my grandmother said, well, you're too young. And I wanted to go in there, to be in that tent so badly. I think I spent, most of my life trying to get in that tent.
Yeah.
I couldn't get into it, so I built the darn thing. I had, been told a few things about palm reading. My grandfather had met a fellow traveling on the train who did it, and he come home one day and he told me all he'd learned. And I'd read books and talked with other readers and got readings from other people and learned as I went. And after doing it just at birthday parties and just sort of for friends and that sort of thing, I decided that it was time. So I tried a hand at it, and it's something that you learn if you want to put about 12 or 15 years into learning it.
Mm-hmm.
About how long I put into it before I actually took up the nerve to say, well, maybe I should charge for this.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously this background that you have here it's a good segue into how you started to get into the topics of the books that you've been writing about for the last, I don't know, how long have you been at the book trade?
Well, I've been writing professionally since the mid-'80s.
Wow.
Selling to little magazines, small press magazines like Cemetery Dance, as you mentioned, the horror show, Edge Detector, which is a Canadian genre magazine, a whole lot of little magazines that don't always show up at the magazine stores. You usually have to order these directly from the publisher. And this was pre-internet. In the mid-'80s, we the only thing internet, we didn't know what an internet was.
Yeah.
It was all done through the mail. And you get these little, some of them looked like real magazines, and others were just sort of, photocopies tacked together, and they were closer to what people call zines now.
Absolutely.
So I would write for some, and I'd get $200 or $300 for a story, and I'd write for others, and I'd get a quarter a cent a word for a story.
Right.
I'd get a little $5 or $6 or $7 check in the mail, and that would be another publication. So the small press is varied.
That's right.
Some of them have a little bit more working capital than others.
I've always believed that the best stuff anyway is always underground. You got to search for the gold.
Well, gold that's the key, though. When I began to work for more established publishers, I began to realize that there was actually possibly an income to be found, and I'm not writing or telling stories to get rich.
Right.
But it's nice to be able to pay the bills so you can tell a few more stories.
All right, we're going to leave it right there for a minute and take a station identification break. You're listening to the Unified Field, and this is the Steve Vernon interview. Be back in a moment. Stick around.
Do not touch your dial.